Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for joining me today. We're going to be looking at lesson number 9, which, as you know, is our Zone 1 design, amongst other things. But very happy everybody could join me today, and let us take a quick look at the assignment, and then we're going to take a peek at some questions and go from there. Yeah, Christy's saying it's hot in Portland. Yes, I'm sure it is. Got quite an odd temperature anomaly going on the West Coast, actually going all the way into Alberta. In Canada here, they've had a heck of a time with wildfires already, so which is unusual. But that seems to be the flavor of the day, unusual weather. So, all right. Okay, let us just take a look at sort of an overview of lesson 9, and here's the rubric that I brought up. I just bring that up to show you the first part of the assignment where we're looking at the building survey is worth 4 points, and then the zone 1 design is worth 14. So, pretty obvious where most of your energy is going to go with that. And the building survey, I think it's a pretty straightforward assignment. Oh, you'll have to excuse me if my voice starts to go on me a bit today. I was out scything grass this morning, and lots of pollen out there today. So, all right. Yeah, so building survey, it's pretty straightforward. So we're looking at local materials that Indigenous people used, and on the West Coast, that probably is Western red cedar for many of you. What can we learn from some of these traditions? Well, I guess first off, Indigenous people didn't need a 30-year mortgage to build their homes, but I'm sure there's other things there we can learn, and some of the constraints and opportunities, and some current constraints. So that is a little overview of the building survey. The big part of the assignment, of course, is Zone 1, integrated system design. So we've been sort of taking this in baby steps, in a way. This last lesson was focused on a plant system design, and that would be just a small area. And now we're looking at a Zone 1 design. And then, of course, the next lesson, we're going to focus on the remainder of the zones within your project site. And for those on urban sites, Zone 1 might be quite a large percentage of your total area. And then, of course, those on large acreage or even small acreage, Zone 1 can be quite a tiny area. We are going to just take a quick look at some of the elements that we're asking for. And let me just bring the chat up so I can keep my eye on that. As well, we'll look at, we're going to take a look at some examples of previous students, so get a good feel for what they have done, and I can point out maybe some, well, not some faults, but there's an interesting example that I will show you. So there's a good description of what we're looking for. The coast zone 1 is that inner core, and that should be fairly obvious now, what that entails. And if it is your own property, that might be much easier to determine. We certainly have a very good idea of our zone 1 where I live, and We're on 5 acres, but funny enough, our zone 1 doesn't go all the way around our house. It's mainly the south and west side of it. So I know Bill Mollison's example in the Permaculture Designer's Manual is basically a 10 to 15 foot swath all the way around the house, but that just isn't the case in my instance. And I'm sure everybody's going to be quite unique in that manner. But let's take a look at some of the assignment notes here. So a few things we want to see. So we want to see your base map, which is the existing conditions. And then within that, we want to see where the zone 1 is located. We are also, be great to have some photo references as well as a zone map overlay and a microclimate. And then the zone 1 cross section and base map with that cross section. So quite a bit of info going into this first slide here. Then we look at the proposed design, which is great. And this is a conceptual design. So, what does that mean? Well, it's more of a snapshot, almost a big picture, whether that is an urban or a larger site. We just want the concept ideas. We don't really need to be looking at the fine details of it. You're welcome to add that, but you don't have to, of course, at this point. So we want the map of zone 1 and general design patterns and goals. We're also looking at some of the strategies that you're entailing, and then that water management plan is the next sheet that we look at. And this is it's a great thing to focus on, and we certainly really focus on this with our work. We put our design sheets together a little different than the course, but the first priority we place after the base plan and the sector compass is on the water layer, and the rest of the landscape is works around that. So it's great to give that a lot of consideration. And for us, depending on the project, it will have varying degrees of, well, it's always important, but it'll have varying degrees of impact. So with an urban, well, I'll show you a little bit later, a couple of examples from our work. And we just submitted a water layer the other day and had a meeting with a client over that, so we could show you that. So here we want to see about the flow on your property, where it's diverted, any overflow, any passive or active water harvesting. So passive water harvesting would be sort of water coming off of a hard surface, let's say, into the landscape. Active rainwater harvesting is more taking it off a roof and placing it into a cistern or a rain barrel. Want to get specific about some of the strategies there, and that would be one of my parting suggestions if you're to do work for others, is really do give this water layer some serious consideration. And I'm probably biased that way. That's just been my experience with my work in the industry over the years. Is way back when we started creating landscapes, water was, this was before my permaculture days. we used to do a great job of building soil and having layered plantings that were really ecologically friendly, but we'd still be pumping water in. And at this point in my career, that's certainly something that, I see the better I do and my wife does with our design strategies and our work, the less water we're going to have to augment that landscape with. And certainly with annual vegetables, annual food production, there's you need it. And we stored 12,000 gallons of rainwater for that. We also have a really good producing well, so we're not short of water, but our permanent plantings are geared around, little to no augmented water. And it gets tough on a year like this where today we're getting over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And, things are just getting started. It's quite tough on the landscape, but it does give you a bit of a reality check that you need to really dial into your soil health and that water management to help those permanent plantings along. And then the last little bit here on that zone 1 is you want to include some details of earthworks, vegetation, or additions. So, take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. I'm not looking for it to be totally detailed out, but let's say you have some earthworks. Let's say you have a rain garden in mind. The detail I would like to see is, where's the water coming from? And most of the time it's going to be off a rooftop. So you could show um, the inlet, that inlet pipe, and where's the overflow going to? Those are the kind of details that I would really be wanting to see. And those are things you really should consider because you don't want to conceptually design something that is not going to work when you get to the details, right? So you may think, wow, it'd be great to put this here, and then later find out, well, I have nowhere to put the overflow or the land sloping in the wrong direction. So kind of going a little bit beyond the concept is really helpful. Want to hear some of your strategies and what the design addresses, all the elements. And of course, this is zone 1 we're looking at, right? So this is the hub of a landscape. And a focus on energy systems and what kind of conservation strategies are there. So often that could be very simple. Like for us, within our zone 1, we have an outdoor clothesline, right? So we have an indoor clothesline and an outdoor clothesline. We don't like running our dryer. It's a huge energy consumer, and especially when the weather is so beautiful, it doesn't make any sense to throw it in the dryer. So that's a real low-hanging fruit, but that yields a lot of savings. Other things would be shading. So for ourselves, we have some shading on the south side of our house. We get winter light, but we get part of the house is shaded during the summer months. That sort of thing. Some people will show some solar panels and that sort of thing, and that is a great idea. Totally um, support and encourage people to go that route. We haven't gone that route yet. And part of it is we live in quite an old home. It's gosh, I guess it's about 45 years old. So it was built during um it was built during the time when energy was super cheap. And luckily, it's not too huge in modern standards. It's like 2,400 square feet, but we have a heat pump, which is great. That's a modern update. But even to just run a heat pump takes a lot of energy. And so we haven't gone with that. What we had considered doing is getting some solar and some battery storage for a backup because we do live in an area that we lose power in the winter quite regularly, and we had considered that. But we haven't gone down that road just from a cost perspective. So to replace our 6.5 kilowatt generator, it would be about $30,000 to do it in with solar, and it's really hard to justify that. Um, Anyways, so that's a little bit about our energy system. Joe has a good question here. What are your thoughts on rocket mass heaters? Absolutely love them. I haven't made any. We have one small unit that we use for cooking, for kind of emergency cooking. I might have a picture of it somewhere. We didn't make it though. Um, what I'd like to do, we have a fairly recent outdoor kitchen, covered outdoor kitchen area that we built last last fall, and we have to outfit it. And what I'm hoping to do is get a barrel oven going on there. So that would be more in the rocket stove end, and I'd love to get a griddle, just a sheet of steel that was something we could cook on. So I I totally I really like the rocket mouse heaters. I don't well now rocket mouse stoves. The heaters, unfortunately we can't, they're not CSA approved, so we can't use them in our house. Um, but I think they're a great way to go. It's just whether you can for us, it would be more utilizing it for outdoor cooking, for emergency cooking. But yeah, so I hope that answers your question, Joe. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to chat about that further. All right. Um, yeah, so there are lots of, I know there's, if you want to look at one interesting example, Verge Permaculture well, they're in Alberta, so they're a cold climate. A few years ago, they would have, if you go to their YouTube channel, you go back a couple years, they would show a passive solar greenhouse that they built. And they had a rocket mass heater in it. That was a great little setup. Now, the downside is for them to keep that heated in that cold climate, say overnight, you have to be feeding the stove or the heater, or at least get it up to a point where it'll be radiating through the night. But one thing we do in our greenhouse that's more, it's appropriate for this part of the world is we have a poly house, so it loses heat rapidly overnight. But we have our propagation bench on top of rain barrels that are full of water. So during the day, that water is absorbing some of that solar energy, and it helps to regulate the temperature in the greenhouse. During the day, we don't get sort of that flash of heat that can happen. And then at night, it does give off quite a bit of heat. So it's very useful. And again, you got to love these passive things that you don't have to have much involvement with. So let's get back to our assignment here. Yeah, that's a little bit about both parts of the assignment, and there's some resources here as well as the rubric, which we looked at. Wow, throat is definitely full of pollen today. Let us take a look. Maybe what we'll do is take a look at some examples, some student examples here. So, and this is actually one of the examples I was going to show you. This was a student who's on 5 acres. And one of the things that struck me was just the sheer size of the Zone 1. This is absolutely huge if you were to consider that Zone 1 is that really high level maintenance area. So it says, and obviously you're traveling through there regularly through the day, but it's an area that you want to try and maintain at a pretty high level. So it's possible that this person can pull this off. That's a tall order. And I actually think it could have been a bit smaller because what she had proposed here, I believe, was an orchard. Let's just take a look. So there's the existing conditions and section drawing of that in 2 areas, which is great. It's very nice to have that. And then her proposed plan. So she's doing annual vegetables and outdoor kitchen and greenhouse over here. And that, I think that was a perfect place for her veggie garden, even though there's a bit of slope here. But I would question putting an outdoor kitchen that far away from your house. We've been involved with quite a few of these over the years, and along with our own. And I would, I would encourage if someone has this in mind for their Zone 1, is to try and pull it as close as they can get it to their existing kitchen. For ours, we step out the back door from our kitchen onto the south side of our house, and it's, reasonably close, the covered area. We had to put it far enough away so it wasn't shading our annual vegetables that we have at the back door. But yeah, try not to, yeah, this is just my advice. Because what happens is if it's, where's this? I don't know if we have a scale bar on this particular, I don't see one. This is probably a few hundred feet away. So, and I didn't bring this example up to criticize. I'm just pointing out a few things that for Zone 1, you might want to keep in mind. I think outdoor kitchens are fabulous. They are, we were at the beginning, like 20 years ago, we started getting involved with building those, and that was more kind of it was the beginning of that trend in this part of the world, but it's become more of a resilience thing now. I mean, you definitely want to have some way of preparing your food during really warm weather and or periods when you don't have the means to do it inside. A good example for us is we have an electric cooktop and an oven, but our cooktop, which is 40 years old, we have an old Gen Air that I bought, I think I bought for $300 about 10 years ago, and we keep getting it repaired. But it got to a point where we had to pull it out and take it into the company that does all the repairs for us and leave it with them for a few weeks. So they've had it for 3 weeks and it's all fixed up and back here, and we're getting it hooked up Tuesday, but we had to, make do without a cooktop for quite a few weeks. And we grow our own food and like to eat really high quality food. So our outdoor kitchen came to the rescue. And even though it's in a somewhat primitive state right now, it's a great thing to implement into any landscape. I would say that. Next thing here is water strategies and rainwater management. So that's a good thing to consider and how that's going to look. And I would say for most people, if you are in an urban setting, and I would say just about every urban landscape we design, our first goal is, can we get a rain garden in there? Can we take water off of what's often an asphalt shingle roof and remediate it in a rain garden and have that infiltrate into the ground? So that's often an approach for us. Same with collecting rainwater. All the better if you have the right roof surface. And when I say that, asphalt shingle has, which is the most common roofing surface out there, unfortunately, it's full of hydrocarbons. It also has fire retardants. So you don't want to be collecting that water and applying it to your annual vegetables or these even things like strawberries, sort of herbaceous veggies. That's all. Unfortunately, those compounds are going to migrate into the fleshy portion of the plant. So what you can do with that, if you are collecting off of that kind of roof, is it can be used for ornamental gardens, and you can consider adding it, irrigating woody edibles. So things like fruit trees and, you know, raspberry, blueberry, that sort of thing, because those compounds will tend to lock up in the wood and not in the fruit. But do be mindful of that, because that's a really big consideration. In fact, we just have a client right now who contacted us through another colleague who's designing their landscape, but we do rainwater design as well, and and she wanted to collect for her annual vegetables, and she's got the wrong roof for it, so they're actually going to change a section of their roof over to metal to accommodate that and to give her some water sovereignty. Which, that's another important item. Um, I mean, we've got a metal roof, and we're just making some modifications to our system in a couple of weeks, where right now we collect off about 20% of the roof, and the rest of it goes to a rain garden and into a pond. But we're changing our setup to collect, potentially collect 100% of the roof and pump that up to our main collection. So we're doing what's called a pump chamber, and it's quite small. It's about 40 gallons, 40-gallon chamber that's in the ground with what's called an effluent pump, and that's going to be pumping up to our main storage. So it pumps pretty rapidly. Because that chamber's so small, right? So that's what we're doing. We have probably I think we have about 80% collection. We're 80% full right now. We had a bit of a dry winter, which was too bad, but this is going to really help us capture all that rainfall that we get during the summer months. That is so precious. So again, this is a great thing to add. And this person is showing their medicinal and kitchen garden here. And they're going to integrate passive rainwater, which I think you can do. What I have done that is I've found more successful is, and when you put these in, you got to be a little mindful of the contours, because if you notice here, and if we put water into a swale basically it's all going to sit at the low part of the swale. So some of this will probably never have any water in it. So that swale we'd want most likely to be right on contour. But what we have done with our gardens in small spaces is put in these little mulched swale trails. So the mulched wood chip pathway will be on contour and will be dug out, and it could have perforated pipe in it, or maybe it doesn't. But its function is for access, but also to hold and slow water down. So I've found in the past it's a better method than separating them like this. Just kind of when you do have swales that are open, it's a new level of management, right? So it's going to vegetate, and incredibly so, right? You'll get way more growth occurring in that swale. Whereas personally, I don't want to spend energy, my time and effort maintaining an open swale. And I've had them here, and it just did not work for us. But I do prefer the whole path, integrating it into a pathway, or a rain garden, some other way of managing it. So, and again, there's no criticism here. It's just you know, what you probably find is when you start looking at other people's work, it can be quite inspirational because everybody will see something different. Then when you have a little bit of experience behind you, you start to see, well, this particular strategy that I tried didn't really work out that well. And a lot of it has to do with maintenance, right? How easy is it going to be how easy will it be to look after? And here's another part of their zone 1. So big planting, pollinator planting, stepstone walkway, very well done, very well illustrated, and some nice plants here. Great idea. They want to capture rainwater and put it under the deck, I guess in liquid tote, which is what this is. And then they're turning this old paddock into a kitchen garden. So this was another little piece that I recommended is all these little raised beds. These were going to be raised hugel beds. Hugel culture beds are fabulous, and we just put one in a couple of weeks ago here. But we made it quite long. It's probably, I guess 40 or 50 feet long, and we grow squash on it. So having all of your beds hugel, well, if we look at this setup here where you have a raised bed and you basically put wood in the bottom, yeah, I'd say every raised bed we've ever done on our property uses this method. And it's really, it's great. I would love to have more raised beds. But what is a consideration here is the production versus the workload. So there is an awful lot of edge going on here, a lot of pathway, and I think this is very interesting sort of geometric layout. But my suggestion for somebody who wants to grow most of their own food is to take a look at what some of the market gardeners do. And traditionally, what you see them doing is running 30-inch wide by 50-foot long beds. And they'll have 12 or say 18-inch pathways. And that's what we've mimicked on our property here where we've been able. And those areas are the easiest to irrigate, the easiest to look after, also the easiest to maintain because the 30-inch wide bed, you can basically straddle right over the bed for harvest, for weeding. There's so many good things about that. So in this case, this person could have run a whole bunch of, basically had one large area as a bed and had 30-inch rows running and have some raised raised areas. I think it's great to have both, but maybe over here just have a whole bunch of more cropping beds. So what they would probably find is this just would be easier per square foot to look after. But that's my opinion. And then some inspirational images here. And again, that's more of a traditional hugel mound, which they are great. Totally recommend anybody do that. Outdoor ovens, and there's your, sort of rocket mouse oven. I'm not sure how that would work indoors. I don't see, I guess there's a chimney at the back there. But for outdoor use, fabulous. And then some catchment for rainwater. So it's a very nicely illustrated Zone 1 design. Let us just take a peek at a couple other ones here. This is a hand-drawn excuse me, this is a hand-drawn example, and person has put this on Google Sheets and then kind of overlaid what Zone 1 is for her project site. Now I'm trying to remember the size of this. I think it was a couple of acres. Area. No, so not even a half acre. And you can see, it's very interesting to see, Zone 1 is part of the access. Totally get it. You going up and down this every day. And then having your Zone 1 way out here, that's very interesting as well. I would say that wouldn't be ideal. I'm not sure what this person did. Let's take a look what she did on those outline areas. So it looks like it was a bit of a food forest. And a swale, some water introduced there. So I would say, if you do want to do a food forest, doesn't necessarily have to drop into a Zone 1. That's something that should not require that level of maintenance. And, this is all part of getting to know, just because you designated Zone 1 doesn't mean in the long term that it'll be that way, right? So this may have been the perfect place to do this planting. So maybe it'll end up being a Zone 2 or 3 just because it doesn't need that much aftercare. So totally nothing wrong with that. So Sabrina has a comment there. Isn't this contrary to design focus on Zone 1? Yeah, it is. And that's one of the reasons I'm showing you these examples. It's not that these are wrong, but that really Zone 1 we want to have tighter. Ideally, we want to have it tighter to the center of our activity. So that's usually the house. So for instance, where I live, our Zone 1 is probably, 20 or 30 feet from the south wall of our house. And then it gets tight where it wraps around our garage and then kind of bulges out on the west side to incorporate our greenhouse. And then a very narrow strip down to our chicken coop. So that's what works for us. Our chickens are right at the boundary of our zone 1, zone 2. So you're quite right. This is a little out there. Again, that element, great addition, maybe just not appropriate to label it as a zone 1. And the focus should perhaps be on food production. I can't remember if this is, I don't recall what the different buildings are here, but an obvious thing is just to start growing food close to the house, right? So that is one example. Let me get another one here. Here's an urban example. And this is really small in that it was a duplex. So this project site is only this half of the driveway, the garage, and lucky for the student, they have the southern portion of the outdoor landscape area. So she has it full of vegetables here, and was trying to augment it. And some beautiful illustrations. Did a very nice job of the graphics here. So, but that is just one part, right? So with designing, you have the ideas in your head and articulating them graphically. So, you want to try and work on both of those. Certainly for myself, I think early on in my career, I was probably weaker on the articulating it graphically. And it is important. You want your clients to know what your intent is as best you can. But this student did a fabulous job of graphics. And you can see a section drawing here, and the intent. And really the intent here was to load up the space. So it's not a huge space, but really intensify what's going on here with the trellis, with some insects, duck habitat, composting. And this isn't really well done in terms of the base plan being black and white, and then these various elements being colored. It makes it quite easy to read and understand. And Christy here has a comment or a question. Is zone 1 connected to frequency of use or location? I'm thinking someone who uses an outdoor tranquil space daily might have it located away from a home. Yeah, that's quite possible. And that's a good point. And it really is, I would say it's more frequency of visitation, right? And it doesn't mean you're going to have to necessarily work there, but normally that zone 1 is going to have the highest level of maintenance. So for say it's on an acreage setting that has a little bench, like where we live, we just put in an ecological pond and it's full of tadpoles and it's looking great, and we're going to put somewhere to sit there. So that may be, you could consider that seating area a zone 1, even though we're not working outside of that every day. We certainly visit it every day, but and it is a little bit seasonal too. We're not necessarily going to be there during the winter months as much. So Christy is saying she's thinking of a gazebo.
I was just thinking, Jamie, about that prior design and wondering why maybe that person might have in that smaller space put that zone one out there. And I did notice that there was a gazebo. So I
Mm-hmm.
thought, maybe it's just a different perspective of use, and perhaps that person does use it every day. So I'm just
Sure.
wondering, when we focus on this, and I know that we're focusing on the plant design and whatnot, though. So it's in your critique, should we put why? If we put a zone one away from the home, should we be explaining why we're putting it so far away from the home?
Oh, I wouldn't, if you have a reason,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be like when I grade and review everybody's work, I'm not going to be, um, I'm quite careful. I hope to be careful with any constructive comments. And if I saw, let's go back to if I see somebody saying this is their zone one, I would comment that, wow, that's wonderful, but you know, I'm not sure you could pull that off at, at the definition of a zone one, right? Um, it may be that they're in the space daily, and you'd have to be with annual vegetables, and that everything's great. It just may not be like I can see this being zone one, right? But then you're adding all this other space. That's just a tall order. So if you have an area that's zone one away from the core of the main living area, yeah, no problem at all. Um, Sometimes that's just the way it is. And I would just, it's tricky because when we do our designs, we have these zones in the back of our mind, but we're not being specific. We're not saying, oh, we're designing this element here because this is zone one. Um, we do that sort of inherently. Like we wouldn't put, like I said here, I wouldn't recommend an outdoor kitchen this far from a house. Now, I have designed and built one that far from a house, but I just don't think it's a great idea. If you can get it closer, you know. So to answer your question, no, don't worry about having to justify anything at all. Just consider, you don't want to expand zone one so it's so large that you or your client is enslaved with the maintenance end of it, because it should be the highest level of maintenance in and around that area. So in this example, perhaps the whole front is a zone two. That's probably what would happen because there's going to be so much energy here, right? And probably in the new planting back here, which I believe was where is it now? There we go. Like this planting year one, that would require a lot of aftercare. But beyond that, not so much, hopefully. But with this sort of a setup, that's a lot of care every day if you want to have, a good level of success. And then we're not even talking about the pathways and maintaining that. Is it grass? Is it wood chips? Is it, there's so many options there. Um, yeah, I hope I somewhat answered your question, Christy. But yeah, don't worry. Like I wouldn't get too, and I guess this is a good example too. This is a great idea, having a food forest. And this may be the perfect spot for it on the property. And just because the person designated it as a zone 1 doesn't mean that this shouldn't go here. It may just mean that, it's not necessarily going to get the sort of visitation that the designer thought it would. And maybe it doesn't need that. Once established, this should really not need daily treatment. So hope that makes sense. Yeah, this was an urban example. And again, nice graphics and nice bit of explanation about each element, some photos. It just makes it very easy to understand, right? So when you have, sometimes less is more. So we have a subdued base plan, and we have just little blocks of color for those new elements. So again, a little bit more detail. And then the water management plan here. So I often see this, and it's worth mentioning today, is often I'll see people, they want to collect off the roof into rain barrels and then drip irrigate those into their annual vegetables. So we'll kind of put roofing materials aside without considering that. Just the whole feasibility of that is not realistic. Now, why is that? Well, if you want to run drip irrigation and use what's called pressure compensating nozzles, so they're nozzles, what it means is if you had, say, a grid like this, so maybe there's a couple 100 feet of piping, that a nozzle here and a nozzle over here are going to have the same output of water. That's pressure compensating. So you get even distribution of water. So to do that, you need to have at least 15 to 20 psi of pressure. And you will not achieve that through gravity irrigation with this kind of a setup. Generally speaking, you have 0.433 psi per foot of head. So what does that mean? That means for every foot of elevation gain, you gain 0.433 psi. So if you wanted 20 psi here, you're probably getting close to 50 feet of elevation to make that happen. So it's really not something that can ever happen on an urban site. Not one I've seen anyways. That's a lot of elevation change. Even where I live, where we have our main catchment area, main storage area high in our landscape, it's only 20 feet higher than most of our vegetables, and it's just not enough. We have to pump it up and we have to pump it out of that area. So, unfortunate reality. I missed a little remark here from Christy. Sorry about that. So, Christy, thanks. Just thinking more about others, understanding of the design and its purpose as they view it, not too concerned about the grading. Right. Right. So I don't think I have it handy. But I know when my wife took her PDC, and she took it through Oregon State years ago, way back before we had this template file and stuff, and unfortunately I wasn't her instructor. She did a beautiful job of that, but I can tell you what her zone 1 was. And at that time, it was this hub around the house that I described earlier. Plus, it was a walking she would go on a daily walk on our property. So basically this little 6-foot strip around the property. So that was zone 1. And that's pretty easy to understand because that was a route she traveled daily. So I hope that makes sense. So Joe, do you use wobbler? No, I don't. I think they're pretty cool. I would use those in a poly house. I've been considering that for that use. I can show you what try and get a picture here of my landscape. See if I got a here. I'll just switch over here to another. There we go. So there's part of our storage. Let me see here. I know I have. Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit of work finding. Hmm. See, there you go. There's a swale I built back in 2020, and wasn't happy with it. Yeah, I'm gonna have to search around for. There we go. We use a lot of micro irrigation. So these are 50-foot beds, and we have some above ground poly, and I guess every 10 foot we had a nozzle here. And then we'd put out a cup, basically a measuring cup, just to see how much water. We're going for 1 inch of water application every time we had it on. Now, it really is crop dependent. We have drip irrigation, so drip tubing for our squash mound and for our potato crop because we don't want overhead water there. And we're going to be doing something uh, not quite this nozzle, but something similar for our tomatoes, but more of a dribbler. Now let me just show you a link here that is worth taking note of. And Tilco makes some really good products. And if you go there, and they have different, slightly different spec sheets for different countries here. So they do dribblers. So I've used these before in more ornamental situations. This would also be good for tomatoes. We have used it for that. These are a great product for that. So you can see here, they're talking about pressure compensating. So you can do, very not primitive, but very basic with a drip. You can also put a drip into the poly itself. I prefer running, this is called spaghetti tubing, and that just comes off of the poly pipe. So those are good products. I do like the Vari jets for some crops, and for these are good in more permanent plantings. They're adjustable, and they're either 180 or 360 nozzles. Spectrum are good, but they're not adjustable. And then we've used these as well. There are just all sorts of options depending on what you're trying to do with them. There's kind of a rotary. So yeah, I would check if you're looking at drip irrigation, Joe, this is a good site to look at is Antelco. Another site to take a look at would be Rainbird. And they have quite an extensive drip irrigation section here. So I'm not a huge fan of their drip tubing. Not that they're not fabulous product. It's just let's see here, drip line. You can get a similar product made by someone different, and the reason I don't like these is that they have what's called a proprietary fittings. So I don't like that. I don't like to have to go buy specific fittings for the pipe, whereas everybody else, well, not everybody else, but many other manufacturers will have this very similar product, and you can use just standard half-inch tees and couplers and fittings for them, rather than, again, this proprietary. But I've used a lot of Rainbird products, their controllers, their valves, their sprays, uh, there's a lot of different, really depends on what you're trying to do. But we have used these quite a bit, these 1800 series, and they come in different heights. These are very useful at the edge of permanent plantings, these 12-inch pop-ups. They're quite expensive, but we could do a whole class just on irrigation. Yeah, so I didn't get a chance to show you any of our examples. I don't think that's really vital. Maybe I'll save a bit of that for next go around. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like me to cover off? What I didn't do is look at the Google document here for questions, just to make sure I am covering here. Don't want a question not all right. Let us go to that. Okay, so Joe had a question. Are there techniques or strategies used to simplify your plant choices for areas you're designing? Yeah, I do. So I have favorites, but what I do is I will at first, let me just get my ducks in a row here. The first thing I will do is get an availability list from one of my main suppliers. And I may have to look at several different suppliers, but that is my starting point. I go through their list, see what I like, see what I don't, and what we typically do, I'll try and pull up an example here. Don't know if I have one that's easy to grab, but what we do with our clients is we will put together what's called a planting palette. There we go. All right, I will just share that screen for a moment. So this is This is a job we did quite a while ago. And so this is our concept design. So there's nothing specific here except for some existing plants in gray. And what we do is we will put together a list of plants that we propose to use. And that is based on what we can find locally. So I always do that first. I make sure the availability is there. And then we'll put this list together and we'll send it to our client and say, hey, if there's anything on here you don't like, let me know, and we will not include it. Or if there's some must-haves, we'll make sure they get included. Because with our work, we provide it's a fixed price agreement that we put together, and we built in a few edits, but when we get to the planting plan, there's no edits. The only time we are open to feedback is really at this stage where, hey, here's our palette of plants that we're considering. And then we're going to arrange it the way we see best. And if you want to change that, that's totally up to you. But if we're installing it, we certainly want to be able to change it on site a little bit. But that's how we work. This would be the hardest thing to edit because it's like a domino effect. If somebody pulls out something they don't want out of a planting plan, it can disrupt the whole thing. You might have to start over again. So that doesn't work for me at all. Let's see here. So you can see this is a working copy. We don't usually have this. This would normally not be, there wouldn't be highlights, there wouldn't be stuff scratched out. But as I go through the drawing and I'm doing the planting plan, I'm referencing this. So if I go, I'm going to use this Ficus Desert King, I'll highlight it, right? So I'll make sure that we're getting the plants that the person wants in here, and I make them very aware that, not all of these are going to be in their drawing. So that's kind of the starting point, and then I try and get some unity happening, some repetition, so that there's some, this is the aesthetic part of me. I want to see some unity. I don't want it to look like a botanic garden, like one of everything. It can just be a little too active, a little too busy. I want it to look a bit calmer. So we'll pick something that we can do that with. Often it could be trees or it could be shrubs. Those are the two main elements that we usually try and repeat some items in here. Or it could be the herbaceous end too. So this is kind of what we deliver just prior to starting based on availability. And then we kind of work from there and try and repeat certain elements. Okay. Let's go back to the question sheet here, and I see the chat's got some activity on it. I'll get right on that. Uh-oh. Seem to be having trouble finding my... Sorry about that, people. I'm not sure why this... There we go. All right. So I think what you'll probably find, Joe, is after you start doing this more frequently, you'll end up with favorites that you want to use, right? And strategies for picking quickly. I think that's kind of all the same. you know, once you get, let's say somebody wants an edible landscape and you know, like Ficus Desert King is like, you know, it's the ultimate fig for much of the West Coast. And that may be a favorite, you know, a sort of mid-sized plant or small tree for a landscape that may end up be one that one you like to use often. You may find like gooseberries are just incredibly bomb-proof, which they are. They are quite bomb-proof, and you can put them in really difficult areas. Um, I think part of it is just really dialing into the space you're going to be placing these and what those microclimates are, what the moisture levels like. You can always improve the soil. That's not as big a deal. It's just really what they're going to have to endure. So like we put in a bunch of elderberry last fall, but we put them into an area that's kind of a zone 2 of our rain garden. So they have access to water. They're not flooded at all, but they have access to a lot of water. And I haven't irrigated them yet. That's a recent planting. They still look good. So that you know, that's where I think, you know, that's kind of where I try and go with all of our permanent plantings, is try and match them up as best I can with uh with the water layer basically, and try and minimize inputs. So I hope that answers your question, Joe. If you have anything you want to add to that, no problem.
Just out of curiosity, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you,
All
Joe.
right, perfect. Do you like limit the nurses or the nurseries that you'll go to? Like, you have like a perimeter, and then you won't go beyond that when you're picking plants?
Um, Pretty much, yes. Closer the better.
Yeah,
And if I can get it all from one,
right.
that's even better. Because delivery, I don't often, you know, very different now to when I used to do this, but I often don't even see any plants. It's just a list I use, and they pick the plants for me, and they get delivered, and we're all good. You know, um, a lot of people will go and select them themselves, and I totally get that. That's fun. Um, but I deal with wholesale nurseries, so I'm not, I can't do retail. I used to, and again, it was a lot of fun going to retail nurseries, but wholesale is where I go after. And yeah, you get significant savings, probably half price basically to a retail. All right. So if you're good, Joe, I will go on to Grace's question here. You have a specific question about water management. No, you can go ahead, Grace. Are you on the call today? Yes, you are. Yeah,
Yeah.
go.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I've been struggling with this for the last week. I have in my zone 1 area, I have a super muddy path that's like the primary access path for the zone 1 area, and it's sloped, and it wasn't really a problem before this last year, but we've had some, a few super extreme rain events that have kind of turned it into a bit of a stream at certain points. And so, rethinking the path and also how to divert I'm pretty sure that it's runoff from the driveway that is causing this versus
Right.
anything from the roof and the downspouts. I'm pretty sure it's from like the driveway, which is on a pretty steep slope itself. And so
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering, if I should be thinking about management further up the slope, like on the driveway, and how to prevent it from actually even reaching this area, or if I should be, thinking about some kind of rain garden kind of drain incorporated into the rethinking of the path to help divert it in a way that it doesn't become damaging. Because there's definitely been some significant channels forming in it this year, and it's just like a sludgy mess when it's been raining super hard.
Sure. Can you um can you post your document link in the chat here? Do you feel comfortable with that? And we
Sure.
can,
Let me figure out. 1 second. I'll post you the link to the last page that I have a link to.
sure.
You might want to go to, it's kind of visible on slide. Gosh, bear with me. Oh, what slide number is this? Oh wow. 129, it looks like.
There we are.
There you go.
Now, maybe what I'll do, I'll go back to your base plan.
There it is.
All right, so is it over here that you're talking about?
Yeah, so above that, you can see there's kind of a path that comes down from the driveway that kind of
Yeah.
curves around those raised beds.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's basically turning into a little bit of a stream.
Right. Yeah, and that's understandable given all the hard surface that's up here.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Like you would know better than I do. This looks like it might be a little too much of a slope for a rain garden.
Yeah, it's it's pretty sloped. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
excessive, it's not hugely steep. And I was kind of wondering about creating something like winding, even like down through the blueberries. But I was thinking that the best solution might be to, push it to the eastern edge of
Mm-hmm.
the property. So it's really, getting as far away from the house as possible
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a bad idea at all. What kind of pathway material is this?
It is dirt right now, and it
Right.
definitely needs to be reinforced. I was almost thinking of even turning it into like steps with stones or something, but it's not it cannot it really limits the accessibility in rain, which is not infrequent. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, you could try and divert it up top here. Let's see. I mean, I don't know your site as well as you do, but I mean,
Mhm.
it's possible you could do something up here.
Mhm.
Um, Here, let me.
So you think maybe coming up with a solution that prevents it from even reaching that path might be the way to
Yeah,
go?
yeah, you might be able to divert this away, and so that it is falling down. That may also create challenges with existing plants there.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing you could do, yeah, when it's steep, do you see water shedding off of the
Well,
driveway into the landscape?
that's the thing. I don't see a lot running on that side, but I see more running to the west side of the house. I actually took some video the other day when we had a couple days of really torrential rain, and it literally looked like a river down the west side of the house. I only know it's happening on the east because I've seen the channels forming.
So one thing I would do, so right in this area here,
Yeah.
and here too, um,
Mm.
I'd go out with a fork
Mhm.
Like if it was myself, I have a penetrometer so I can test it, but you don't need that. If you go out with a fork and you push that into the existing landscape, um, and even with your foot and you push it in, let's say you have a fork that has 12-inch tines on it,
Mhm.
just think about how much effort it takes to push that in. So where I'm going with this is if you were able to, we'll assume this has some compaction to it. So let's say you build a pathway here,
Mhm.
and in these growing areas, if you decompact that with a broad fork and add organic matter to it, you may find that the amount of water that this holds now increases, and that this area is a lot drier because of it.
Mhm.
That's one thing I would do, because with steeper slopes, um, water is inherently wanting to shed off of it, and when they tend to get compacted, then it really starts to move.
Mhm.
And of course, it's going to run down into an area that flattens out a bit more, probably down in this area.
Yeah.
But um,
Okay, I'll give that a go. Thank you.
if that doesn't work, you could run what's called a channel drain right next to the driveway. I don't like, you know, doing any sort of drainage unless you have to. But you could run a channel drain all the way along here, right next, and we've done these before, right next
Mhm.
to the driveway,
Mhm.
and then um, exit that pipe somewhere that it's going to work for you. So you may have to,
Okay.
take that down further in the landscape in a solid pipe and get it away from the house and get it away from, say, high use area.
Mhm.
Um, those are a couple of thoughts you might want to consider.
Okay.
But at first, I would try and see if it'll absorb into the current landscape there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. If it was less slope, I'd say a rain garden is a perfect solution, because it's just this passive collection that you don't have to, that's just benefiting the landscape. But you shouldn't have more than about 15 degrees of slope on it. So I think you might be over that here by the looks of it. All right. So we've gone over time a little bit. Let's just get caught up on the chat here. So Max was trying to review the syllabus. All right. Did you get that sorted out, Max? No. All right. Let me just we'll jump over to that. Okay. I think I have to back up here. All right. Syllabus. Uh-huh. Doesn't look like we're... Is that what you were after?
Yeah, that is what I was after. So when I try to click that thing you just clicked, it does not take me here.
Interesting. Um, I can download this and post it.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Maybe what I'll do is maybe I'll post it in our Q&A discussion board. How's that? Because I can make it a PDF.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, I'll do that. Might even be able to put it in the chat here. Hold on. Yeah, I should be able to. Oh, no, I don't. Yeah, I'll just put it right in the chat as a Dropbox link. There you go. That should work for you. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Max. All right. Well, we've gone a little bit over time, but is there anything else that I can help anybody with before we call it a day here? We're all good. Okay. Well, that's great. Well, thanks everybody for joining me today. And if you have any trouble leading up to the due date next Monday, let me know, and I'm happy to help you out. There's also, let me just post it in the link here too, or sorry, in the chat. Okay, where is it? There we are. If anybody gets into a jam, you can just click on that Calendly link that I have in the chat there, and can book a quick Zoom meeting with me, no problem. I'm happy to walk you through that. Especially at this late stage in the course, certainly don't want anybody getting to a point where they don't feel like they can move forward. So, all right. Yeah, well, thank you again for attending, everybody, and look forward to seeing your assignments next week. And don't hesitate to reach out if you do get yourself into a challenging spot. But you take care and have yourself a great rest of your week. And thank you again.